So a key objective of strategy is to achieve competitive advantage. So what is actually competitive advantage? Well, let me give you my definition of competitive advantage. For me, a firm has competitive advantage if it outperforms its industry peers. So I want to understand what is the average profitability in my industry and can I beat that? So fundamentally, competitive advantage is in some sense proportional to your margin. Right? We have higher profitability if we have higher prices or lower costs. And really at some very fundamental level, that's what it boils down to. Competitive advantage is driven by higher prices and lower costs. Now, this is sort of one of those little equations or slides that to me makes it hard to teach strategy. Because at this point you ask yourself, higher prices, lower cost, I kind of knew that. And I completely agree. The problem we have in strategy is that we have lots and lots of tools and we have lots and lots of buzzwords. And you may have had that experience where you sit in a meeting and someone tells you, to create competitive advantage, I would advise you to leverage your core competencies in this hyper-competitive environment to create some centers of shareholder excellence and create shareholder value, or something like that. And the problem is, at that point, probably what you should have said is, that sounded really sophisticated, but could you let me know, how will this help me at the end of the day to have higher prices or lower costs? I think this is a very helpful discipline in whatever we do to drill down to that level and ask, how will it help us to have higher prices or lower costs? To me, it's a bit like the law of gravity, right? It will hold. You cannot suspend it, and at the end of the day, that's something that we really have to achieve. That leads us to the next question of, how do we do this? How can we achieve higher prices or lower costs than our competitors? Now, here's a silly question. Do you think we can do this by just imitating what other firms are doing? And we will say, well, of course not. Well, let's do the following. Let's go to the airport. Let's go to the airport bookstore. And let's look at the books that are on the shelves in the management section or in the strategy section. And what books will we find there? We will find books on total quality management, on Six Sigma, on benchmarking, on best practices. All books that are about how to make it easier to copy what other firms are doing. Now, I'm not saying these are not good books. I'm not saying you shouldn't read them. But what I will say is that's not strategy. So we really have to be very careful in distinguishing what I might call operational effectiveness and on the other side, strategic positioning. So operational effectiveness is all about achieving and maybe extending best practices. And clearly that's important, but it's quite different from strategy, which is about doing different things. So what's the problem if we just focus on operational effectiveness? Well, I have the same managers come to me and they say, Nicola, you know what? We are now as lean and mean as we've ever been before. And we work as hard as we've ever been before. And we are as efficient as we've ever been before. But you know what? Our profitability doesn't go up. And why not? Because all our competitors are now as lean and mean as they've ever been before. And they work as hard as they've ever been before. So what's the problem? The problem is if we just focus on operational effectiveness, we get absolute improvement, but not necessarily relative to our competitors. Of course, that also implies we really have to focus on operational effectiveness, because if we fall behind on that, we're not even in the game. But also implies it's not sufficient. It's maybe necessary, but it's not sufficient. But what's the second problem if we just focus on operational effectiveness? How do many firms actually achieve operational effectiveness? Well, they copy each other's best practices, right? They hire best practice consultants. They observe a certain firm has a certain practice in place that allows that firm to lower their cost, so they copy it. They observe another firm that offers a certain features that customers like, they copy that. And so what happens? Well, all the metrics that we're looking at, costs, quality, they all look good. Costs go down, quality goes up. The only thing that doesn't happen is profitability moves. So the problem is, what else happens? As firms copy each other, they're becoming more and more alike. And so what do we have now? We have a process that we call strategic convergence, where we have a set of firms, as they copy each other's best practices, they decrease their costs, they increase their quality, but they also become eventually identical in the eyes of the customers. And so what we end up is a set of highly efficient firms that are completely identical in the eyes of the customers, and as a result, we get very fierce competition. So in some sense, firms, by just trying to achieve operational effectiveness, sort of undermine their competitive advantage and undermine their own profitability. And so we really want to try to avoid this process of strategic convergence in industries. Just to give you one example, if you think about the automobile industry, all automobile manufacturers today are manufacturing their cars at much lower cost and much higher quality levels than they were 10, 15 years ago. But now a car comes down the road and you say, oh, what's that? I think it's a Jaguar. No, let me see it closer up. It's a Ford. No, it's a Hyundai. No, what is it? Right? Because all cars now roughly look the same. All car manufacturers have gone from 7-year product cycles to 4-year product cycles. All car manufacturers have gone to longer warranties. All car manufacturers have the same aerodynamic design. So that's why it is a problem, right? We're having all these firms very efficient, but fairly indistinguishable in the eyes of the customers.